The biggest politics story of the summer is about to begin. Bigger than the Ensign affair, bigger than the Sanford affair, bigger than the Palin shock resignation, and all the legislation we don't yet know the fate of. It is the biggest political show yet, and it starts on Monday. That's the first day of the Senate confirmation hearings for President Obama's Supreme Court nominee, Sonia Sotomayor, call in sick now to get a jump on Monday morning. The Republican opposition to Sotomayor appears to be less related to whether or not she will ultimately become a Supreme Court justice. That is a widely, though not universally seen, that is widely, though not universally seen as a foregone conclusion. The Republican strategy here seems to be more about how the Republican Party wants to be seen in opposition to her. Senators Pat Roberts and Sam Brownback of Kansas and James Inhofe of Oklahoma have all already pledged to vote against Sotomayor. Inhofe refused even to meet with her. And as the Republicans have prepared for the confirmation hearings, their strategic decisions about how to oppose Sotomayor's nomination seem to be mostly lining up in the same direction. The big, blinking, familiar American directional arrow marked race. Thus far, Republicans have attacked her wise Latina comment. They have called her an affirmative action nominee. They have singled out her ruling in an affirmative action discrimination case. And they have called the lead white plaintiff from that case to testify against her. Now, in the final days leading up to the hearings, they have chosen to inveigh against her work for the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. The Republicans have also decided to have Senator Jeff Sessions lead this battle for them. When Arlen Specter defected to the Democratic Party, the Republicans had a choice of who should be their top senator on the Judiciary Committee. They overtly chose Jeff Sessions of Alabama to be that top Republican. Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, who had his own chance at a federal judgeship blocked in 1986 by the Senate Judiciary Committee by both Democrats and Republicans after testimony that Sessions had called an African-American assistant U.S. attorney boy, and that he called the NAACP, quote, un-American and communist-inspired. Mr. Sessions offered this explanation at the time for his behavior.
These comments that you could say about commie organization or something, I may have said something like that in a general way, and that probably was wrong.
Probably was wrong, but you know, who's to say? Is the Republican Party using the Sotomayor nomination to position itself aggressively on race? This is not a theoretical rebranding about the party and its future, about its potential future leaders. This is now. Is the party showing in action that it is actually refocusing the party along old school Mason-Dixon lines? Joining us now is Melissa Harris-Lacewell, political science professor at Princeton. Professor Harris-Lacewell, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Nice to be here.
So first of all, I have to ask if you agree with my hypothesis. Does it seem to you that the campaign against Judge Sotomayor's nomination is substantially about race?
Absolutely. Clearly, Sotomayor is herself a moderate progressive. She has an enormous background behind her, one of the most experienced justices to be nominated, more experience on the federal bench even than Roberts. So rather than going after anything on her record, they're going after her identity, after her personhood, and most critically, after her ethnic identity and race.
Well, strategically speaking, let's talk a little bit about that decision by the Republicans. I mean, Jeb Bush did an interview this week with my former colleague Tucker Carlson in Esquire magazine. And in that interview, Jeb Bush lamented that the Republican Party is completely losing Hispanics now after having made some progress with them. And he says the party can't win if it continues to alienate Hispanics. They all have to be cognizant of that demographic truth. So what's the big political strategy here?
Well, it's very bizarre. I mean, on the one hand, you have Michael Steele supposedly at the helm of the GOP with this hip-hop strategy that is apparently part of their big tent strategy, a strategy which actually, whatever you think about George W. Bush, was effective under his administration. In fact, W's administration had a much higher number of Latino and African Americans at very high levels in the administration than are actually represented. big tent strategy over the course of the past decade, and suddenly it appears that they are going to fold that big tent up. And most critically, they seem to be prepared to do it around the question of Latino voters, which is an enormous mistake, because of course what any political party wants is new voters, and it's been the Latino voting bloc that's been able to give parties sort of new voters, and they're losing that here.
Well, but why would they make that decision? I mean, I think it doesn't make sense for Democrats to think that Republicans are just willingly and knowingly stepping off a demographic and political cliff. I think they have to sense that there's some political wind at their back. There's some political gains to be made, even if they are going to give up Latino voters in the process.
Well, you know, certainly this was true 40 years ago when the party strategically made a choice to go, massive resistance on questions of racial equality in the South. And it appears that they're doing a sort of massive resistance strategy here against Sotomayor as well. I mean, this is pretty much a foregone conclusion. She is going to be the first Latina justice on the United States Supreme Court. And they're going to go down as a party that opposed her on the basis of her ethnic identity. All I can think is that they're thinking there's a way to kind of capitalize on anxiety about an African-American president, anxiety about a growing majority rather than minority of people of color, and try to mobilize a kind of white anxiety base. But I actually think they're off base here, and that they're in fact likely to alienate Latino voters who are really where the new voting bloc exists.
Let me ask you about a different but related matter. As you know, I follow you on Twitter because you're very amusing and clever. And I know that you were one of the early major voices in this country trying to alert people to an incident that happened at a swim club in Pennsylvania involving a bunch of essentially black kids being sent home from the pool and told that they were changing the complexion of that club. What can you tell us about the situation?
Yeah, it really was this moment where you felt like, okay, here you have an African-American president nominating a Latina woman for the court, and at the same time, right in Pennsylvania, the most old-fashioned, nasty kind of racism that we tend to associate with the 1950s. So a group of about 60 African-American and Latino youth who were part of a summer camp program that had paid $1,900 for the purposes of using a private swim club arrive at the club and are told that they cannot be part of it. Not only that, but they hear racially derogatory comments by the white adults there and are sent home. Now, the happy ending to this is that many of the Twitterati and progressive white Americans, moderate white Americans around the country have expressed outrage, and other swim organizations have come forward to give these young people a chance. But you really do feel like there is this undercurrent, this kind of old-fashioned, nasty racism that hasn't gone away, and makes us all, I think, a little suspicious about the idea that the election of Barack Obama, the nomination of Sotomayor, necessarily means that we are in a post-racial era.
Absolutely. Well put. Melissa Harris-Lacewell, political science professor at Princeton and earpiece wrangler extraordinaire. It was well done. You sort of look like you're just listening really intently. You played it off really well. Thanks, Melissa. Nice to see you.
Thank you.